Order. We start with questions to the Minister for the Cabinet Office, Tom Rutland.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning. The government estimates of the amount of money lost to fraud and error vary hugely, in truth. The latest estimate has a range of between £40 billion and almost £60 billion, which is a huge range. Now, the public rightly expects us to do all we can to minimise fraud in the use of public funds, and that's one reason why my Right Honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, has announced the establishment of a COVID Corruption Commissioner, whose job it will be to track down as much as possible of the money lost to fraud during the pandemic. The Cabinet Office will work closely with the Chancellor on this to try to ensure best value for money for the public and, of course, try to crack down on fraud right across government departments and agencies.
Secretary McFadden, I think the group. Grouping?
Oh, forgive me, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'll answer questions 1, 5 and 10 together.
Excellent. Tom Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. COVID contract fraud has cost the public purse an estimated £7.6 billion, with the previous government signing contracts worth billions for useless PPE to those with close personal connections to ministers through their so-called VIP lane. With the Chancellor this week announcing a new COVID fraud commissioner, can the Minister please outline how his department will work with the Treasury to support the Commissioner to ensure that this egregious waste of public money is rectified and the British taxpayer gets back what it is owed?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right to draw attention to what happened during COVID, when VIP lanes and dodgy contracts ended up burning through billions of pounds of money, sometimes for unusable equipment. We will do everything we can to recover money that's been lost. And in terms of the COVID Corruption Commissioner announced by the Treasury, my department will work closely with the establishment of this office to oversee this work and to try to ensure best value possible for the taxpayer.
Chris Vins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New technology must be at the beating heart of the new government, and AI presents an opportunity to tackle waste and error. The National Audit Office has claimed that counter-fraud agencies are only just beginning to utilise new technologies in their fight against public sector fraud and are reliant on outdated legacy systems and incomplete on time-lagged data. How will the Minister implement new technologies, including AI, to tackle fraud and error in government?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member is absolutely right to say that there's potential for greater use of AI in detecting and rooting out fraud. We want the UK to be an excellent place to develop new uses of AI, both in the public sector applications and the development of private business. There is already a single network analytics platform, which is an AI-based detection tool to try to help public sector organisations detect fraud. But like many AI applications, we're probably only at the beginning of what can be achieved here, and we should use every technological tool at our disposal to secure best value for money for the taxpayer.
Dr. Rupa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As well as Matt Hancock's pub landlord scoring a PPE contract despite having zero relevant expertise, non-COVID error, fraud and waste also cost the public purse £58.5 billion in the year 2020 to 2021 alone. Could my right honourable friend tell us how these colossal sums of money will be recovered? And he mentioned a commissioner, how we get rid of cronyism and nepotism so these kind of things never happen again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to draw attention to the scale of this, and the truth is that the amount that has been recovered in the latest figures is relatively small in relation to the scale of loss. And we saw the former government's own former Minister for Counter-Fraud describe the party opposite's record. He said it was nothing less than woeful and riddled with schoolboy errors. And the Shadow Business Secretary described the previous Prime Minister's handling of this as dismissive. But we can't afford to be dismissive. That's why we have a duty to take it seriously and use whatever means we can to bear down on fraud so that money meant for public services and legitimate recipients of public funds is used for its intended purposes.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr Speaker, I want to highlight innocent errors where government systems are failing to pick up overpayments, and as a result people are chased. And I'm thinking particularly of unpaid carers, where earning just a few extra pounds means that DWP is now clawing back thousands from them in carers allowance, and that's because HMR systems failed to alert DWP when earnings increased. So what is the Cabinet Office doing to ensure that governance systems properly work to stop these kind of things happening in the future?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, this issue has been highlighted more than once in the Chamber this week, and we of course are hugely appreciative of the job that carers do, and that has to be balanced with the proper use of public funds so that those funds get to the intended recipients, and where there are overpayments they do need to be recovered in the interest of the taxpayer, but I hope that's always done in a proper and compassionate manner.
Shannon.
Mr Speaker, can I welcome the Minister very much to his place and wish him well in the role that he now plays. And this question is a vastly important question right across the whole of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Does the Minister hold statistics for Northern Ireland in relation to fraud and error costs on the public purse? And what discussions will the Minister undertake with the devolved institutions to improve the financial decisions, and particularly at the Northern Ireland Assembly? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is my first, but I suspect not my last exchange with the honourable member. I haven't seen a specific breakdown of this figure for Northern Ireland, but I can tell him that we take relations with Northern Ireland extremely seriously, and that's why the Prime Minister went to Northern Ireland as well as Scotland and Wales on the weekend after the general election.
Right, Mary Glindon.
Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And with your permission, I will take questions 2 and 7 together. Yesterday, I met the civil service unions together with my colleague, the new Minister and Member for Queen's Park and Maida Vale. We had a very positive discussion covering a whole range of issues. I made it clear that the days of government ministers waging culture wars against the civil servants are over. Instead, we want a civil service that's motivated, valued, and helps the government deliver its priorities. And on the specific issue of pay, the government will have more to say on civil service pay before the summer recess.
Mary Glindon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 14 years, the Tory government did nothing to tackle the ludicrous situation whereby there are over 200 pay bargaining units for civil servants across all government departments and agencies. A highly time-consuming and inefficient process, it generates unfair pay disparities between people doing near identical jobs in different government offices. So will the Minister take this opportunity to look again at whether pay bargaining can be consolidated across the civil service and agree to meet with the PCS union to discuss the advantages of such reforms?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, we do value civil servants, and of course we want all public servants to be properly and fairly rewarded. And like any public expenditure, what's spent on pay has to be balanced against other priorities and fair to taxpayers as a whole. In terms of meeting with the PCS, I met yesterday with the General Secretary of the PCS, as well as other civil service unions. I hope for a fruitful dialogue with them. Departments do have flexibility on pay. They can direct pay towards the needs of their own workforces, and we will have more to say, as I said, about civil service pay before the summer recess.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the reply he's just given. Will he assure the House that he's going to make progress towards a return to full sectoral bargaining? He must also be aware that there are many thousands of civil servants that are not covered by the pay review body or any other bargaining mechanism. Will he take steps to ensure that all civil servants are brought within the purview of a pay review body bargaining unit as a part of a return to sectoral bargaining?
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. I hope to have a good and fruitful dialogue with the civil service unions about pay and many other issues. It's important that we have public servants who feel valued and motivated and do their part on delivering the government's objectives. On the specific issue of pay that he has raised, as said to my honourable friend, the government will have more to say on civil service pay before the summer recess.
Luke Murphy.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to answer questions 3 and 22 together, with your permission. As the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster has set out, the previous government allowed waste and fraud to spiral out of control. Latest estimates show 10.5 billion of estimated fraud and error in the COVID-19 schemes. This waste of taxpayers' money is unacceptable, and the new government is taking action. The Chancellor announced this week that she will appoint a new COVID counter-fraud commissioner who will use every means possible to recoup public money.
Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I welcome the Minister and the entire ministerial team to their place. Public sector fraud underwent a massive spike during the pandemic as personal relationships trumped proper due diligence. With billions of pounds still in the hands of fraudsters, it's imperative that the new government works quickly to recover what was lost, and therefore I also welcome the Chancellor of the Exchequer's new COVID Fraud Commissioner. Can I ask the Minister what steps the government will be taking and her department will be taking to ensure the money is recovered as quickly as possible, and indeed to ensure that something like this never happens again?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is right that the last government oversaw VIP lanes that led to millions in waste, and we're still unpicking the impact of that lack of oversight. I've met with the Public Sector Fraud Authority to set out my commitment to strengthening the counter-fraud approach across government. As I've said, the Counter-Fraud Commissioner has been introduced to support their work and will use every means possible to recoup public money, reporting directly to the Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my corner of London, concerns have been expressed about a particular supplier being awarded contracts worth over £25 million for useless PPE after being put forward by a former minister in the VIP lane. I wonder if the Minister could say more about how the Public Sector Fraud Authority and the Treasury will ensure that every penny that can be returned is returned to the public purse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very happy to meet the honourable friend and hear more about the individual example from their constituency. As I've said, I've met with the Public Sector Fraud Authority. We've set out that tackling fraud is an absolute priority for the Cabinet Office, and we will use every lever available for us to get back what is owed to the British people. The Public Sector Fraud Authority is already working closely with the Treasury on the role of the Counter-Fraud Commissioner and will continue to do so.
Ian Lavery.
Question number 4, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The infected blood scandal is one of the gravest injustices in our history, and it's vital that we get final compensation to victims as soon as possible. As of the 30th of June this year, the government has paid over £1 billion in interim compensation to those infected with infected blood products and bereaved partners registered with existing support schemes. The total number of recipients of interim payments across the United Kingdom is 4,606.
Ian Lavery.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And thanks for that answer. Sadly, the previous government dragged their heels with regard to this absolute tragedy. Of course, they'll deny that, but the fact remains is that there's still 3.5 people dying with regard to contaminated blood. What's the figures actually? That there's 2 people per week dying as a result of contaminated blood without full compensation. Can the Minister tell the House when the latest report from Sir Robert Francis regarding the compensation recommendations will be published?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that question. I want to pay tribute to his campaigning on this matter, including presenting a petition to this House on behalf of his constituent Sean Cavens back in April. With regard to the specific point he raises, I pay tribute to the work of Sir Robert Francis, and certainly the Government will publish his report ahead of laying regulations to this House. But more broadly, in respect of compensation for which victims have waited far too long, this government is committed to paying comprehensive compensation to the infected and affected victims of the scandal, and indeed the Prime Minister said that on only his second day in office.
We now come to Shadow Minister John.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and may I start by offering my warmest congratulations to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Paymaster General. I offer him my sincerest good wishes in these opening weeks of a new government. I start with deep respect for him, and I wish to support him where I possibly can whilst fulfilling my constitutional responsibility. It was the privilege of my ministerial life during my 6 months in office to accelerate and then deliver the legislation to set up the Infected Blood Compensation Authority. Please could the Right Honourable Gentleman set out what progress has been made given the urgency of this work, and if he's on track to meet the expectations of Sir Brian Langstaff and Sir Robert Francis, given the engagement he will undoubtedly have had with them already.
Firstly, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for his welcome. I do pay tribute to the work that he did in government in terms of pushing this agenda forward. And I also say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that when I was sat there, I always sought to work on a cross-party basis, whilst, of course, holding the government of the day to account. And it's good to hear that he is going to continue work in that spirit. And with respect to the timetable that he refers to, our aim is still that final compensation payments will begin to be made by the end of this year. The Infected Blood Compensation Authority is established in law, and the team is working hard to put the operational systems in place to make sure that we do start delivering final compensation payments by that target.
John Clem.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his response. Previously, when he was sat here, he described my commitment to set out a clear timetable as another important victory for the victims to deliver the compensation scheme. And in that spirit, will he reassure the House that the regulations that I committed to by the Act of Parliament on the 24th of May will be laid by the 3-month legal deadline on the 24th of August? And will he report to the House the earliest opportunity on when also he will respond to the inquiry's report, which is intended by the end of the year?
I'm grateful for that question, and I do believe that that 3-month deadline was hugely important in speeding up a process that, frankly, had taken far too long for the victims. I do give him that commitment about meeting that statutory deadline of the 24th of August, and I also hope to update this House sooner than that in terms of the ongoing work.
Yuan Yong.
Question number 6, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, and with your permission, Mr Speaker, I will answer questions 6 and 8 together. Discussions at the EPC enhanced cooperation on European security and advanced the reset of our relationship with Europe. The EPC brought together 46 European leaders, recommitted to Ukraine's defence, and announced a new call to action against the Russian shadow fleet. The UK agreed cooperation arrangements with Slovenia and Slovakia to disrupt serious and organised crime. The Prime Minister also announced an increased UK presence at Europol and an £84 million package to tackle upstream migration.
Yuan Yong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and to the Minister for his response. Many small business owners in my own constituency of Earley and Woodley have expressed to me their strong need for smoother trading relationships with our closest neighbours, and so I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister held meetings last week with the Irish Taoiseach and with the French President. Can the Minister set out how he will build on those relationships to improve trade ties and to boost British businesses trading with Europe?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that question. I welcome her to her place. As our nearest neighbours and as close allies, both relationships are of great importance to the UK and to this government's plan to reset our European relationships. We look forward to working closely with the Irish and French governments as we take forward our plans to improve the trading relationship to help boost businesses, jobs and economic growth.
Johnny on Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can the Minister outline more about the additional support that was offered at the European Political Community Summit to Ukraine and what impact it's expected to have?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that question. And in the margins of the EPC, 44 countries signed up to a UK-led call to action to tackle the Russian shadow fleet, which is using malign shipping practices to evade sanctions and the oil price cap. In addition, Ukraine signed bilateral security arrangements with Czechia and with Slovenia. The opening plenary discussion focused on the need for Europe to support Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Shadow Minister John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There can be no doubt of the high regard that the Right Honourable Gentleman is held by the Prime Minister, given he is tasked within his responsibilities of resetting EU relations, reforming the House of Lords, renewing the Constitution, as well as legislation and delivering all public inquiries, as well as completing delivery on infected blood. But can he confirm how he will work with the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and whether, in effect, the Cabinet Office now run the Europe desk in FCDO from 70 Whitehall?
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm grateful for that question and a reminder of the number of responsibilities and tasks that are going to require delivery over the next months and years. But the written ministerial statement that was issued in the Prime Minister's name yesterday clearly sets out the division between the roles. I look forward to leading on the UK-EU reset, cross-department, cross-Whitehall from the Cabinet Office. But of course, the FCDO will continue to deliver the diplomacy across Europe that is vital to that.
John Glenn.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for that answer. But I think many in the House and in the public at large will be curious as to what plans he will develop in terms of trade-offs between any changes he seeks to make on behalf of the government with the EU. And for the sake of clarity and transparency, will he describe how he expects to evaluate the benefits of any changes and how his Prime Minister's commitment to respect the referendum outcome will be meaningfully adhered to through this process? And does he expect, and when does he expect, to make a statement to the House on the progress that he's actually making?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The government's approach to this was set out in the Labour manifesto that was overwhelmingly endorsed at the general election. We will not rejoin the European Union, we will not return to freedom of movement, we will not rejoin the customs union or the single market. But what we will do is advance a reset in the relationship. That is set out in the Labour manifesto. And our test for this is for our European continent, the UK and the EU together, to be more secure, safer and more prosperous. That is what is in our national interest, is what is in the EU's interest as well.
Lib Dem spokesperson Christian Jolly.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I welcome the new Minister and indeed the whole team to the front bench. I'm sure the Minister would agree that perhaps his most important role will be in repairing that broken relationship with the European Union for our security, for our defence, and most importantly for our economy. And given the new Prime Minister's focus on mission-driven government, and with our recent return to Horizon Europe, what discussions did the Minister have about extending the Youth Mobility Scheme to the European Union, or will he have? And as it would give thousands of young people the chance to live, work and study abroad and increase our cultural and economic links with Europe again.
Mr Speaker, the government's been clear that we will not be returning to freedom of movement, but clearly we want to see economic and cultural ties to be far closer than they are at the moment, indeed closer than they were under the previous government. That is what is in the interest of the UK, is what is in the interest of the EU. On the economic side, the government has already set out its objective of a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement to achieve mutual recognition of professional qualifications to help our excellent services sector, but also to ease the position for our travelling musicians around Europe, which is so hugely important to our cultural soft power.
John Trickett.
Number 9, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In permission, I would like to answer question 9 and 16 together. This government will always aim to secure value for money in meeting their facilities management requirements. Our plan to make work pay is clear that we will call time on the previous government's ideological approach to outsourcing and ensure decisions are based on robust assessments of value for money, service quality, social value and, crucially, delivering the best outcomes.
Tricky.
I thank the Minister very much for her response and welcome the whole team to the front bench. The problem with outsourcing is, isn't it, that normally the outsourcers will drive down paying conditions for the workforce, thereby creating a two-tier workforce. They're not accountable to ministers properly and they're exempt from freedom of information. And finally, the question of public service centres. My thoughts when I think about outsourcing. Will the Minister confirm that we're going to proceed with abandoning this ideological obsession which the previous government had with outsourcing?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and he is right that too many decisions about outsourcing were ideologically driven under the previous government without consideration for things like social value or service quality. That is why we have said that we will do things differently, and social value and outcomes will be the heart of that. Our new deal for working people will transform the world of work.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The outsourcing of facility management services roles like cleaning, catering and security has disproportionately impacted women and black workers who have suffered a reduction in their pay terms and conditions. The government has promised to bring about the biggest wave of insourcing of public services in a generation. So with that in mind, will the Minister agree to examine the benefit of insourcing facilities management services with regards particularly to performance and tackling discriminatory outcomes on pay? And will she agree to meet with representatives of the PCS union to discuss this matter further?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she's right that under the previous government too many jobs in sectors like cleaning and security were insecure, with a race to the bottom on standards and on pay. Our plan to make work pay will ensure that all jobs are secure, fulfilling and well paid. The honourable member also mentioned disproportionate impact on ethnic minorities and women. That's why we have said in our King's Speech that we will bring forward an equality bill to enshrine in law the right to equal pay for ethnic minorities and disabled people and introduce mandatory ethnicity and disability pay reporting.
Lucy Rigby.
Question number 11, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to answer questions 11 and 13 together. Digital technologies will be absolutely vital to the delivery of the government's missions and to effective public services. The Prime Minister yesterday announced the move of the Government Digital Service, Central Digital and Data Office and the Incubator for AI from the Cabinet Office to the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Working closely with the Cabinet on this will be the Treasury and the Cabinet Office itself, together with DSET. Creating this strong digital centre of government is intended to help drive forward innovation and ensure a better experience for the citizens who use government services.
Lucy Rigby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the entire ministerial team to their places. The UK has a chance to become a world leader when it comes to bringing new technologies into the heart of government, and the concept of a mission-led government provides a unique opportunity to do exactly that. What steps is the Minister taking to ensure digital technologies are being used to support the government's missions so as to deliver for my constituents in Northampton North and indeed people across the country?
I thank the honourable member for her question, and she's absolutely right. The UK does have the potential to be a leader in this. This is all about securing both value for money for the taxpayer and the best possible citizen experience for the user of public services. And it's with that in mind that we are creating this strong digital centre of government. The DSIT Secretary is in the driving seat, working closely with the Cabinet Office and the Treasury to try to achieve those twin aims.
Josh Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite significant spending of taxpayer cash, as in so many things, public sector productivity got worse under the last government. When I worked in artificial intelligence, it was clear that so many of the barriers to harnessing technology are specific, granular, and often not glamorous, like sharing data better across organisations. So, can I ask the Secretary of State if he has made an assessment of how digital technologies can be used to increase productivity in the public sector and improve public services?
I thank the Honourable Member for his question, and let me take the opportunity to thank the Right Honourable Member for Salisbury for the work that he did on public sector productivity. My honourable friend is absolutely right. I suspect we are only in the foothills of the potential here. That's why we've created this strong digital centre of government. We want to ensure good value for money and to use tech to improve the citizens' experience. And the real challenge here is to reform public services to match the constant innovation that people experience in other parts of their lives. We cannot have a world where that innovation is experienced in the private sphere but isn't applied and properly maximised in the public sphere. So that's what we want to do.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 12.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's really important to restore confidence in government and in public life and to ensure the best possible standards. This was an important manifesto commitment that we had. We will establish a new independent Ethics and Integrity Commission with its own independent chair to ensure the highest possible standards. Work has begun on this, and I'll keep the House up to date as this develops.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend, right honourable friend, for his response and welcome all the team to their place. Could he expand a little bit more on exactly what the terms of reference might include? For example, will they also include participative and deliberative democracy methods that might also help to restore the trust in politics, which is at an all-time low, as he knows?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member, and I'll certainly keep her up to date with this as it goes. In truth, Mr. Speaker, this is always going to be about show, not tell. We will set up the best system that we can with this new commission. And on this front, my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, is taking immediate action to tighten the existing prohibition on MPs providing paid parliamentary advice. The House will be debating this later today. We're also setting up a modernisation committee. So on several fronts, we want to get the right systems in place. But in the end, it's a matter of show, not tell.
Joe Powell.
Number 14, please, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer questions 14, 18 and 19 together. This government believes public procurement is a key lever for enabling delivery of our missions. Effective procurement will allow the public sector to deliver better services for citizens. Our ambitious programme to make work pay will drive genuine value for money in procurement and support organisations to create local jobs, skills and wealth. The new digital centre of government will ensure procurement drives uptake of new digital technologies to improve our public services.
Joe Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. As she said, value for money is fundamental, but procurement can also be used strategically to ensure growth opportunities and social benefits are felt across the country. Can I ask her what steps the government will take to up the ambition in the implementation of the Procurement Act, so we have the data, the skills and the digital tools to drive a more mission-driven and economically transformative commissioning and purchasing across the government?
Thank you to McFadden for the question. Public procurement, as you've said, is a key lever for delivering improved standards in business and achieving social value. It's one of the levers in making sure we're growing our economy and supporting good jobs. It's something that I saw in local government, where Labour councils made huge strides in delivering social value through procurement. And the government's plan to make work pay sets out that ambitious programme to value organisations that create local jobs, skills, wealth and treat their workers well and equally.
Mr. Speaker, and can I join colleagues in welcoming the ministerial team to the front bench? The government has made clear that tackling waste in public procurement is a priority and that crony relationships will no longer define the awarding of contracts. Can the Minister reassure me and my constituents in Bolton North East that contracts will be awarded based on what is most cost effective and better for the public purse?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. As we've set out earlier, the government has launched the Fraud Commissioner, whose role will be to look at what went wrong and make sure we are learning those lessons and the VIP lanes and the issues we saw previously cannot happen again. And the new Digital Centre of Government, working on closely with the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, will ensure procurement and effective market engagement are used as effective tools to drive uptake of new digital technologies and protect us against the kind of things we've seen previously.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As an NHS physiotherapist who's worked during the COVID-19 pandemic, I had the misfortune of witnessing firsthand how crony contracts resulted in wasted resources. Whilst these contracts may be intended to reinforce the NHS during the unprecedented crisis, they did a disservice to both our NHS professionals and patients. Can the Minister outline what tangible steps the government is taking to avoid this waste of resources in the future and reassure the constituency of Dudley and the wider nation that the government will take public spending seriously?
Thank you to my honourable friend for the question, but also for your service during COVID, and to all the health and care staff who risked their lives to protect us. As you set out, billions were spent on PPE that was either unusable, overpriced or under-delivered. And this government is absolutely determined to learn those lessons and safeguard every pound of taxpayers' money. I've met the Public Sector Fraud Authority and set out our commitment to driving down fraud across government, and we are determined to learn the lessons from the work of a COVID Commissioner that will report to Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I offer a warm welcome to the ministerial team. Mr. Speaker, constituents across Glastonbury and Somerton tell me that quality matters to them as much as value for money. Will the Minister agree with me that we must ensure that public procurement considers environmental and social factors as well as value for money?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've set out, value for money is absolutely critical for this government, and we want to make sure that every pound of taxpayers' money is spent wisely. We're inheriting a perilous economic situation, and we need to invest in public services, but we also need to deliver social value, which includes workforce standards, environmental standards, and that is how we deliver good growth.
Sarah Coombs.
Number 15, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to answer questions 15 and 21 together. The sleaze of the previous government eroded trust in politics and the public's belief in our political system. The Prime Minister's commitment to upholding the highest standards of integrity in public life is clear. He met with the independent adviser on ministers' interests on his first day in office, and this government is committed to ensuring high standards, including establishing an Ethics and Integrity Commission, reforming the business appointment rules and appropriately empowering the independent adviser on ministers' interests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just 49% of people in my constituency of West Bromwich voted in the recent election. That came as no surprise to me, as I had conversation after conversation with people who'd lost trust in politicians because of all the rule-breaking and scandals of the previous government. Please can I ask the Minister what steps the new Labour government is taking to restore trust and ensure that politics can once again be a force for good?
Thank you for the question. This government will restore trust in politics by delivering for the public. The Cabinet Office will support the development, as I've indicated, of a new Ethics and Integrity Commission to deliver that much-needed reset on standards in public life. We will also review and update post-government employment rules and support the Prime Minister as he issues a new ministerial code and, as I've indicated as well, grants the independent adviser the powers and support that he needs.
We're indigest.
Mr. Speaker, polling before the last general election found that 2/3 of the British public did not think that the then government had behaved with high ethical standards, which probably accounted for the disillusionment with politics that we saw on the doorsteps. Therefore, it is essential that the new government now works to restore trust in politics and to put public service rather than self-service at the heart of everything that it does. Given this, how will the Minister ensure that ministerial standards are upheld, and how will he ensure that the independent adviser on ministers' interests has the power to crack down on misconduct?
I'm grateful for that question. He's entirely right about the frankly appalling fall in standards that was presided over by the previous government. That is why the Prime Minister is insistent that this is a government of service to the public. Now, on the specific question that my honourable friend asks, the Labour Party manifesto committed the government to giving the independent adviser on ministers' interests the powers to start investigations into misconduct, but also to ensure they have access to the evidence they need. And those changes will be introduced in due course.
Will Roberts.
Number 17, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Cabinet Office provides a framework to support departments and employees, including signposting on how to raise a concern, channels to do that safely, and practical support available to whistleblowers. The Cabinet Office is working to capture whistleblowers' experiences and ways to improve that experience. As laid out in the King's Speech, we're introducing a duty of candour bill that will improve transparency and accountability.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good whistleblowing is good for government. Last year, the National Audit Committee published a report saying the government must do better to address failures in government. And even more concerning is that half of civil service feel it's not safe to challenge the way things are being done. They feel that their concerns are not being listened to, or that, in fact, they will face negative consequences for speaking up. Will the government actually create a new office of whistleblowers to create new legal rights, but also promote greater public awareness of the rights of whistleblowers?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you've set out, whistleblowing is absolutely critical, and we've had a discussion today about fraud, about some of the problems that emerge when we don't have those protections in place. So we are absolutely committed to supporting whistleblowers, to making sure that the statistics you've set out, that we're looking into them, what's causing them, and supporting whistleblowers. It's something that's incredibly high on our agenda and we'll continue to look into.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 20.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Speaker. This government recognises the importance of long-term sustainable resilience, which is why the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will chair a dedicated Cabinet Committee on Resilience. In response to the COVID-19 inquiry Module 1 report, the government committed to considering all the findings and recommendations and announced we will carefully review our strategic approach to improving resilience and preparation across central government, local authorities and communities like my honourable friend and emergency services.
Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I warmly welcome the Minister to her place on the front bench. May I thank all our key workers in the NHS who have kept us safe during COVID. When we come to national resilience, these are the people we need to be thinking of, and I thank my member sitting alongside me on these benches. In Plymouth, staff in Derriford Hospital faced extremely difficult circumstances during the COVID crisis, and the COVID inquiry has found that this country was not adequately prepared. What steps will the Minister make to make sure that if we have another pandemic in this country, key workers in places like Plymouth are not put under that stress again? Thank you.
Thank you. I would also like to welcome my honourable friend to his place and thank you for his previous public service in the Royal Marines. I also want to put on record that I also share the points that he's raised, and also like to thank the key workers for the work they did to support us and protect us in the COVID pandemic. The government will certainly ensure lessons are learned from this inquiry and response to the pandemic, and we will take the necessary time to consider the inquiry's report and assess our resilience against the full range of risks the UK faces. The Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster last week announced he will chair a committee for resilience, and this will improve our health sector, increasing public trust within the government and kick-starting our economic growth, as well as ensuring that we improve the resilience across the UK.
Richard Holmes.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Resilience is incredibly important for our country, and one of the key things in that is ensuring that people are actually working in government to do that. The last government instituted that every worker had to be in the civil service, had to be in the office through at least 3 days a week, moving back from what we saw under the COVID pandemic. Well, what is the government going to do to ensure that all of our civil service workforce is there on the front line, working closely together to ensure that national resilience is embedded across our public sector?
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for raising that question. As I said, it's important that as a government we work strongly together across the UK. And as the Prime Minister has mentioned already within day one, he'll be working with devolved counterparts, government counterparts, and has announced a Council of Nations and Regions. And that will include us working across all civil servant departments to make sure that we learn from the lessons from the past.
Patrick Harlow.
23, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The commitment to a mission-led government sets out a new approach to governing, focused on the outcomes that will make a meaningful difference to people's lives. It means a new way of doing government that is more joined up, breaks down silos and pushes power out to communities. Earlier this week, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster sat as Deputy Chair on the first mission board on growth, chaired by the Chancellor. As part of our plans to deliver mission-based government, we will hold further mission boards as we approach the summer recess.
Thank you,
Mr Speaker, and thank you for the reply. Earlier this month, the Prime Minister announced that he would personally chair new mission delivery boards to ensure that Labour's key manifesto pledges are implemented. But if we want to effectively deliver our manifesto pledges, we're going to need effective communication between central government and devolved bodies. So could my right honourable friend tell me what steps are being taken to ensure that devolved governments are involved in the new government's mission delivery process?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and he is right to point out that we have started to deliver on our promises. For example, just this week the Chancellor has launched our National Wealth Fund, but he's also right to say how important it is that we work with devolved governments to deliver missions. The government has set out its intention to work closely with Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, as well as the Metro mayors and local council leaders in England to deliver the missions. One of the Prime Minister's first actions was to meet all the First Ministers on his tour of the UK. We know that meaningful cooperation will be key to delivering change across the entire United Kingdom.
Come to topicals. Andrew George.
Question 1, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My department's begun its work on helping the government deliver on its manifesto, centred on the first steps and missions that we spoke about during the election campaign. We'll play our full part in driving forward the announcements made by the government, such as establishing a national wealth fund, lifting the ban on onshore wind, and beginning the changes needed to get Britain building again. We've also responded to the first module of the COVID report published last week, and my honourable friend made a statement on the IT outage which exposed the fragility of the systems that we all rely on.
George.
Grateful to the Secretary of State for that response. In respect of the department's responsibility to investigate waste, Will they also investigate the impact? My inquiries have exposed that £242 million of taxpayers' money was spent in COVID aid, handed out to holiday homeowners in Cornwall alone during that period, whilst at the same time only a fraction of that money is given supporting those who are desperately in need of affordable homes, many locals being displaced by the massive growth of holiday homes in the area. So would the government please investigate the impact, whether it be positive or negative, of spending that kind of public money?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can assure the honourable member we take value for money very seriously. It's been a theme of the questions that we've had today. The government necessarily had to support businesses during COVID, and it's right that they did that. But it's important, of course, in schemes like that you ensure the best value for money, because in the end it's all taxpayers' money, and that's what should have been done. And where that hasn't been the case, and there's been fraud or waste, we will do our best to recover what was wrongly spent.
Can we pick up the pace in both questions and answers? We are on topicals now. Rachel Hopkins will be a good example.
Small businesses are the lifeblood of our high streets and communities, creating local wealth and opportunities across Luton South and South Bedfordshire. We know these businesses play a vital role in providing social value, such as distributing growth locally, meeting environmental targets and developing social wellbeing. Does the Minister agree that putting social value at the heart of government's growth agenda is essential?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Growth is a central mission of this government. We want to use all levers available to us, including procurement, to support good growth, to support jobs and to support local communities.
So the Secretary, Oliver Dolan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by welcoming the Right Honourable Gentleman to his position as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. I know he'll be supported by a brilliant team of civil servants who are truly dedicated to public service. As we saw in last week's Module 1 report of the COVID inquiry, biological threats pose potentially catastrophic risks to our nation. These risks will be exacerbated by long-term trends such as climate change. In order to help prepare us, I published the UK Biological Security Strategy. Will the Right Honourable Gentleman take this opportunity to recommit to its objectives and to provide an annual update on its implementation to this House?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Member for his question. I welcome him to his position, and I mean it genuinely, because to step up and serve in opposition after an election defeat is not easy, and I do welcome what he's doing and his colleagues in doing that following the election result. I also echo his praise for the civil service and the team in the Cabinet Office who have supported me and my colleagues in the best possible way over the past few weeks. On the biological security strategy, the answer is simple and short, and it's yes.
Let's keep it going that way. Oliver Dowden.
I welcome that answer, and I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his kind words. An effective strategy must also, though, be underpinned by dedicated resources. That's why one of my final acts in the Cabinet Office was to announce that we would ring-fence biological security spending across government. Will the Right Honourable Gentleman uphold that commitment so that we don't see important resilience spending fall victim to day-to-day spending pressures?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Right Honourable Member set aside spending for his commitments, then he did a pretty rare thing in terms of the actions of the last government, because when we look under the bonnet, we find that's often not the case, and we'll have more to say about that in the coming days.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I welcome the front bench to their roles. The people of Hemel Hempstead put their trust in me because they wanted change. They particularly wanted change for things like healthcare, which the last government failed to deliver on. Could the Minister kindly update the House on the changes that the government is planning to make for my constituents and constituents around the country?
We are getting on with the work of our first steps, including the first step on healthcare. That's a top priority for my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, because we want to make the NHS fit for the future. We did it before, and we can do it again.
Dem spokesperson Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This summer we've been celebrating 25 years of devolution in Scotland, and in the last Parliament, the Scottish Affairs committee looked at the relationship between the UK and the Scottish Government, how it has deteriorated over the past decade and how we could improve it. So would the Minister agree with me that we have to, with the next tranche of devolution, be looking at how we improve those relationships with our devolved administrations, regional authorities, and perhaps we should set up a UK Council of Ministers to involve ministers from all the authorities and regional mayors?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We do intend to set up a Council of Nations and Regions. She's absolutely right that we need to improve relations. It's easier said than done, because to be honest, these organisations are run by political parties. But I do hope that the election result, in all its facets, represents the opportunity for a bit of a reset here and better relations in the future.
Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In just over a month, Phase 2 of the Grenfell inquiry will report, and there'll be implications, obviously, for the entire government. But can I ask what preparations have already been made ahead of the report, and can the Minister commit to engage with the bereaved survivors and affected community before the government responds in full to those recommendations?
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for this question. I know this is an issue close to his heart, and it's an issue close to my heart. The publication will mark its important milestone for the Grenfell community, and Parliament will have the opportunity to give its full and proper scrutiny to the issues deserved. But as the honourable friend has mentioned, it's important that bereaved families are also part of that process, and we'll be working very closely with MHCLG to make sure all those residents are properly part of this process. The government will do everything possible to drive the change to ensure that lessons are learned and that a tragedy like the fire at Grenfell Tower can never happen again.
Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. In 2005, the tax cap was 7.4%. In 2022-23, the last government cut that down to 4.8%. I just wondered if there is a cross-government mission or target to close the tax gap further.
Mr. Speaker, we will do everything we can to collect the most amount of tax as possible. That's right, we're interested in value for money, and after the legacy that we've had, I can assure him it's needed.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the pandemic, my request to the then government to source PPE from local UK manufacturers were largely ignored. Can I request that the Minister insist that any commissioner, COVID corruption commissioner, listens to the voices of companies like Techman and Context in my constituency about what happened at that time?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure all lessons should be learned about the procurement pressures at that time, including the one that he raises.
Ford.
Thank you. We heard at the COVID inquiry that Cabinet Office structures were not designed to manage a whole of government crisis. What might this government change to better prepare for the next emergency?
Mr. Speaker, the great danger is preparing perfectly for the last war. And the real challenge in resilience is looking round the corner at things that haven't already happened. And I think as we respond to the COVID pandemic, it's really important to keep that in mind, and that's what we'll try to do.
Sarah Coombs.
Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic devastated families in West Bromwich. In our borough of Sandwell, 1,476 people lost their lives. Now the COVID inquiry is exposing just how poorly prepared we were and how insufficient thought was given to how the pandemic would affect ethnic minority and deprived communities. Can the Minister set out what his government is going to do to work with local government and across the board to ensure we're better prepared in future?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to thank my honourable friends for raising this question. The government recognises that the pandemic disproportionately impacted vulnerable groups and minority communities and will continue to affect many people. It is essential that we review the way we prepare for future emergencies to minimise wide disproportionate impacts. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will chair a dedicated Cabinet Committee on resilience to oversee the work to assess and improve our national resilience. We are putting people in the centre of this government's missions, and we will learn from the lessons from COVID-19.
Caroline Downage.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the 12% of people in my Gosport constituency that have served in the armed forces, could the new Cabinet Secretary please explain to me and to them why he's not joined by a Veterans Minister on the front bench this morning?
Mr Speaker, that is because responsibility for veterans is being transferred to the Ministry of Defence, which is a better home for it, and the priority for looking after our veterans will be well cared for and made a big priority in the Ministry of Defence.
Sam Rushworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In recent years, rural parts of my constituency were left without power for a week following Storm Arwen. And during COVID, children in upland areas were unable to access school due to poor connectivity. Would the Minister agree with me that resilience requires taking into account the energy and connectivity needs of areas like Teesdale and Weardale?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I also like to thank my right honourable friend for this question, and also for him and his family for walking across the country to raise awareness of child poverty during this pandemic. The government recognises the disruption caused by the pandemic to education, and inequalities are vastly different across different access to online learning and IT equipment. We are committed to learning lessons from the past and making improvements for the future. In the immediate term, the government has invested to delivering nationwide gigabyte connectivity as soon as possible. We are investing £5 billion as part of this project to ensure that the hardest to reach across areas in the UK, like his constituency, receive coverage.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Further to the question by the Honourable Member for Blyth and Ashington, does the Minister hold any statistics for how many individuals are due infected blood compensation in Northern Ireland? And furthermore, how many have been awarded? I'm happy for the Minister to send me the stats if he doesn't have the figures to hand. Thank you.
So I'm grateful for that question. I don't have the specific figures for Northern Ireland to hand, but if the honourable gentleman would write to me, I would be only too delighted to provide them to him.
Adam Jogi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The CrowdStrike outage this week showed how reliant we are on digital infrastructure. So what will the Minister do to reassure people in Newcastle-under-Lyme that Britain will be resilient against cyber attacks and hostile action from those who wish to do us harm?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question and made a statement in this House on Monday in relation to the CrowdStrike IT outage. There will be a lessons learned process as a result of that, and also a bill going before Parliament to ensure that we are resilient in relation to our cyber security. It will strengthen our defences and ensure that more digital services than ever are protected.
Final question, Kat Ettles.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A constituent of mine is currently going through the process of adopting a little boy. She and her husband have one daughter already conceived following several rounds of IVF, but sadly that has since been unsuccessful for them, and they've chosen to adopt one of the many looked after children looking for a loving home. My constituent runs a local business, a haberdashery and sewing workshop, which is extremely popular with local people, and in order to integrate the little boy into her family, she is taking time away from her business to spend time with him at home. She has since discovered that she is not entitled to statutory adoption pay as a self-employed person and will have to take this time off unpaid. When adopting children from care, there is a really small window of opportunity to successfully integrate the child with minimal disruption. Costs to local authorities for looked after children are rising. Would you agree? Would you agree that extending adoption pay to self-employed people in line with maternity pay would provide better outcomes for looked after children?
Can I just say, look, we're all on the learning curve, but we do need to be showing punch in this. And you is meaning me, but I'm sure we will not be doing that again. Secretary.
Mr Speaker, on this, I think maybe the simplest thing is if the Honourable lady writes to me, I'll get it considered by the proper Minister.
Excellent. Right, that completes questions. Before we move to the business, I'll let the front benches clear.